Hey guys, welcome back to my page. So I'm going to see if I can squeeze in this quick topic really fast because I'm actually waiting on a mock client that I'm about to do an intake on. I'm at the park. It's really nice park. It's really beautiful out here. So I figured I'll talk to you guys really quickly, briefly about this topic that I have in mind. Was motivated to come up with this topic from a conversation I had yesterday at work with an African coworker. She's from Nigeria, and it was interesting that she brought this topic up about how she noticed in America, because she's been in the U.S. for a couple years now. From okay, that's my mock client. She's been in the U.S. for a couple of years now. She moved here from Nigeria, and she was just telling me like how she noticed the differences in people, specifically African American men, homosexuals here, versus how things are back at home where she is from. And she was saying how back at home they don't tolerate homosexuality in Africa, and I asked her, I said, well, is it Nigeria or is it across the board in different countries in Africa where they don't tolerate it? And she said it's pretty much all across Africa where they just do not tolerate homosexuality, especially in men, but just not just men, but men and women. So I find that to be quite interesting because, as you guys know, in America, it's perfectly legal to date the same sex and even to marry the same sex. Under Obama's administration, that's when same-sex marriage was legalized. And so in this country, it's kind of like more, I think, of a push for homosexuality and for same-sex marriage. So I want to get you guys' input on what do you guys think about that? And why is homosexuality so taboo in the African American community? Should it be taboo? I'm wondering, because if we look at cross culturally how homosexuality is viewed in Africa and African countries and compare it to how people view homosexuality here in America, like there obviously are some distinct differences. And I just find it to be quite ironic how people in America, like, I think I think historically, like in America, homosexuality was this taboo topic where, especially within the African American community, like you could not walk down the street as a gay black man and not be looked at, weird or funny. But nowadays, it's like it's normal, especially out here in LA. It's pretty normal to see a gay African American male and no one thinks anything of it. They may not even notice him or look the other way. And she said, I was talking to her and she said that something that was really interesting to her that she noticed was transsexuals. She was like, in Africa, you don't see that. You don't see transsexual men. And I say, I hear, definitely you're going to see a lot of transsexual men. That's just the thing. And it's more of a freedom of choice. Like it's almost like a human right to be able to express oneself, in whatever sexual orientation they want to identify with. That's their right to do that. And you can't judge them. You can't, it's rude. And sometimes it can get to the point where it's illegal because it becomes a hate crime to attack people just because of their sexual preference. So Marcus Rowan says facts. Like this topic, I think this issue of homosexuality in the African American community, I think is something huge because you have people that are advocating for freedom of sexual expression. So giving people the right to choose who they want to be attracted to, who they want to date, who they want to marry. And then you have people that are more conservative and they're like, no, we ain't going for that. That shit is nasty. It's an abomination. It's evil. It's sick. It's disgusting, especially within the black African American conscious community. It's not viewed in a positive light. These people are condemned. And I find it just quite ironic, where we stand nowadays with respect to this topic. I want to hear what you guys think, like what's your perspective on it? I think for a lot of African Americans, I would say the majority, and I could be wrong, correct me, you guys, if I'm wrong, but I would say the majority of African Americans are more open to this whole idea of freedom of sexual expression, you know, and not just sexual preference, but just being able to be oneself, be identified like with whoever, whatever gender you want to identify with, you know, whether you want to be, if you were born a man and you want to be a woman, if you were born a woman, you want to be a man. I think because of our society that we live in, especially with the laws that are in place to protect people, you know, LGBT community, I feel like people are becoming more accepting of it. You know, so I want to hear what you guys think about this topic, about this issue. Because she said that if people, like, if you were to go to Africa, like, if gays were to be walking around in Africa, like, they would, the men, they would not, they would get harassed. You know, they would get singled out, called out, and probably beat up, she said. Like, they would actually get beat up. You know, men can't just be walking around holding hands, you know, with another man in Africa, and it's okay. And I'm like, wow, really? She was like, yeah, they will probably beat him up. I was like, wow. And she was like, yeah, and the police probably will get him too. I was like, is it really that bad? She was like, yeah. She's like, they don't tolerate it. She said they really enforce the whole idea of that a man is supposed to be with a woman. She's like, God made Adam and Eve, and they really emphasize it, they really promote that in Africa. And she said, not just in Nigeria, the country where she's from, but all across Africa is like that. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, imagine being a gay man and living in Africa. You know, they can't be able to live and express themselves, you know. And I feel like a lot of, especially African Americans, you know, I feel like they feel more liberated being in a country where you can, you know, and there are communities within communities that support the lifestyle so that people can just be who they are, not feel ashamed, you know, not be judged, not be criticized, not be attacked verbally or physically, you know, because of their sexual preference and their sexual expression and their gender expression, you know. I find it, sometimes it can be quite disturbing because you have people, I think, that don't really understand homosexuality. They are the ones who are more likely to make judgments and to be very critical of people in the lifestyle, and they look at them as evil because sometimes people assume that, okay, it's by choice that people are homosexuals. But then you have the other perspective where you have people that really swear by the idea that homosexuality is a genetic, it's a genetic disposition. So it's something that a person really has no control over, and it's something that they were most likely born with. What do you guys think? Is homosexuality something that where people were born with it, or is it something that people choose? My take is that I think it could be both. I feel like I think there's a spectrum when it comes to homosexuality of people that, you know, there is a spectrum, and there's different varieties of people that fall on that spectrum. So you have people that, you know, have a genetic disposition towards homosexuality, and when it comes to gender fluidity, not necessarily identifying with a female characteristics or male characteristics, but sometimes they fall somewhere in the middle. They call this androgynous individuals, people who are have more androgynous characteristics. So I definitely think that it can be genetic and biological, but I also believe that it can be environmental. So I believe that there's a role that nature plays in shaping one's sexuality. I've seen it, you know, happen like in many different circumstances, in many different situations where you have a person who grew up, you know, liking the opposite sex, and they actually dated people of the opposite sex, and some even had kids, but over time they find themselves crossing over. So I want to hear what you guys think. Like, is that even possible? You have some people that say, no, that's not possible. That's not likely that a person can cross over, so to speak. That if a person comes out of the closet when they're in their 30s, it's most likely because they stay in the closet so long because of the shame and because of the guilt. And if it wasn't because of our society that has this negative stigma surrounding homosexuality, they would have came out earlier. Shay says they're becoming more accepting of it because that is what society is pushing into our households. It's everywhere now: music, media, books, school, etc. But at the same time, uh, everyone has a choice. I love all people and I respect their decisions to the fullest. We can't and shouldn't judge anyone. God says it's wrong, but He also says to love thy neighbor and love your brothers and sisters. People love to pass judgment, forgetting that we aren't supposed to. And some of my best friends are homosexual. They are so energetic and positive and happy. I love that about them. Absolutely. Like when you come across a lot of homosexuals, they are really good people. They're not evil people, contrary to what religion tries to teach people about homosexuals and the act of homosexuality itself. And when you mention how it's everywhere, it's like in the schools, they are really pushing it. It's in legislature, it's in politics. It's a more of a systemic movement that you see impacting different areas, of life, different arenas. And definitely in my profession that I work, because I'm trained to become a clinical psychologist, and training clinicians, they definitely push the whole idea of being more accepting of people from different cultures, which would include the LGBT community, and irrespective of their sexual preference and their sexual their gender expression. So we cannot discriminate as clinicians, as licensed professionals, as psychologists, as therapists, against people who identify themselves as, with the LGBT community. We can't treat them any differently than we do heterosexual individuals. So that's where it becomes kind of tricky, because you have, of course, clinicians who grew up with their own beliefs and conditioning, surrounding the whole LGBT thing, homosexuality. And a lot of people just were raised to look at it as something that's bad, as evil, So as a clinician, becoming a professional, one is confronted with this, you're confronted with these negative beliefs that you've already kind of shaped in your own mind, or society has shaped for you within your mind. You've been conditioned to look at it as something that's bad. Okay. So that's my client that I'm meeting up with pretty soon. So being that, people just have in our society have been conditioned one way. And I find it very interesting that how, like, for a period of time, definitely there was a push against homosexuality. It was this negative, evil thing. And then now things are changing, I think, especially with the civil rights movement, where we have people advocating and fighting for civil rights. Within that movement includes the LGBT community. So laws have changed to protect these individuals who practice this lifestyle. My brother is gay and love him just the same. I'm black and disabled. I know firsthand discrimination. Exactly. So that's like double discrimination. Not only is it, you're discriminated against because of your race, but then you're discriminated against because of a disability, and then LGBT. Interesting enough, within our profession, LGBT was considered to be a disorder. Homosexuality itself was considered to be a clinical disorder. It was in the DSM, which is considered like our Bible. It stands for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it's what we use to diagnose patients. And the homosexuality was definitely in there, and they took it out. I think during the civil rights movement, I believe it was removed because you had a whole movement. People were fighting and advocating for it to be removed because they looked at it as it was just normal. It was not something that people should be labeled with as a disorder. It was just, a normal expression. And because the majority of the population, the way, the profession looks at abnormality, how they view it is that if you don't fall within the normal range, which means if the majority of people in our society are heterosexuals, and you are not a heterosexual, that will put you in the minority, then they look at it as, okay, you have an abnormality, something is wrong with you. But I feel like that's very old school thinking. That's very like traditional way of thinking. And with the contemporary perspective, things have changed. People are becoming more educated about it, the lifestyle, not only the lifestyle, but just the act in and of itself. Like homosexuality was this thing that people just didn't know what it was. They're like, okay, what is this? Why do you have same-sex relationships? Why do you have men interested in other men and women interested in other women? And people just were confused, but there's been a ton of research on homosexuality and people becoming more educated about it. So I think that helps a little bit. You are absolutely right. We must learn to be more diverse, open-minded, and accepting. I think that would cut the suicide rate in half as well as the divorce rate. Many men and women are following certain guidelines that have been instilled in them since birth, and they aren't happy. They're hurting themselves and hurting others, trying to live up to what society says is right. But we were born with free will to decide what is right and what is wrong. I'll stop talking now, though, because that's a deeper subject. Yeah, I talked about that in one of my papers, actually. The whole stigmatization of homosexuality and how it impacts one's mental health. It definitely has an impact. Okay, I'm looking for my mock client. She said she was looking for parking. But it definitely has an impact on one's mental health, because if the act, just think about something as simple as your sexuality, right? You don't see anything wrong with it, being a gay person. But if it's not even just your behavior of same sex, it becomes one's identity. You get what I'm saying? This is part of who you are. And if there's a stigma surrounding that, just imagine the impact it's going to have on one psychologically. People begin to internalize these negative views. You're walking down the street and you can kind of sense the negativity. You can sense the people looking at you and staring at you and looking at you in a negative way. People making jokes, people laughing, and you begin to internalize these negative views, and it creates feelings of insecurity within you. It creates stress, anxiety, depression, and all of these things, if they go unchecked, yes, it can definitely put you at risk for, suicide, unfortunately. So I think that's what they have so many support services for the LGBT community, because it has become an issue. It's almost become an even bigger issue than racism, I think. And I think that's where we have, another issue, within the African American community, because it's like African Americans are trying to fight for civil rights and fight for equality. And then we have another group, the LGBT community, are also trying to fight for their rights. And a lot of times the funding that I think people assume the funding that is supposed to go for specifically for the African American community, it gets diverted towards the LGBT community and serving them. So I live in Hollywood, California. There are tons of LGBT community resources out there, like housing, community centers, just places where people from the LGBT community can go to get help, free help for counseling, for anything medical, HIV testing, you need housing assistance, rental assistance. Like, they have so much resources out there. And I think, it comes from the federal government. These are grants that are given to these LGBT community serving agencies that are allocated, specifically just for the LGBT population. So I am going to have to end this video because I think my client, looking for her. I'm actually waiting. I'm waiting to meet up with my mock client because I'm going to administer. I'm actually going to do an intake, and then I'm going to administer some psych assessments. Not today, but I'm going to set it up so that in the future sessions to come, she'll know what to expect. Yes, indeed. Have a good afternoon. Be careful. Knowledge is power. Yes. Yeah, I'm actually getting ready to do some child psych assessments, because, not only do we have to get experience in doing assessments on the adult population, but we have to do it on the child population as well. So she's It's going to be pretty interesting. I don't think I've ever done any child assessments. How have I? No, I've done like treatment with children, but not neurological clinical assessment. So that's what I'm getting ready to do. Hey!
Sorry,
So,
I'm late.
it's okay. So I'm going to catch you guys later. And love you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.